He conquered the entire known world. Then he drank poison, chasing immortality. Welcome to Orient Obscura. We are talking about the first emperor of China. The men who built the Great Wall and the Terracotta Army. But today, we aren't looking at his victories. We are looking at the toxic, mercury-fueled obsession that ended his life and destroyed his empire.
Because this isn't just a story about a tyrant from 2,000 years ago. This is a story about the one limit every single one of us faces, no matter how much control we have over our lives: death. And what happens when the fear of it becomes the only thing driving you.
Let's start at the beginning. By 221 BC, Zheng, the men who would take the title Qin Shi Huang, first emperor of Qin, had done what no one before him ever had. For 200 years, China had been torn apart by the Warring States period, 7 kingdoms, endless brutal war, millions dead. He ended it all. In just 9 years, he led his armies to conquer every single rival state, unifying a land of 30 million people into a single empire. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a complete reinvention of what a state could be. He standardized the Chinese writing system so people from opposite ends of the empire could communicate. He standardized currency, weights and measures, even the width of cartwheels, so trade could flow freely across his new nation. He built a network of imperial highways that stretched for thousands of miles, linking every corner of his territory. He built the first version of the Great Wall to protect his empire from nomadic invaders. For context, this was happening at the same time Rome was fighting the Second Punic War against Hannibal. While Rome was fighting to survive, Qin Shi Huang was building an empire that would outlive almost every other civilization on the planet. For context, this was happening at the same time Rome was fighting the Second Punic War against Hannibal. While Rome was fighting to survive, Qin Shi Huang was building an empire that would outlive almost every other civilization on the planet.
And that's the part we all learn in textbooks, right? The brilliant, ruthless conqueror who built China. But what we almost never talk about is the shift that happened. The moment this man, who controlled every single detail of the world around him, realized there was one thing he could never control.
That shift happened in 218 BC. 3 years after he unified China, Qin Shi Huang was on a tour of his empire when a group of assassins ambushed his convoy. They threw a 120-pound metal cone at what they thought was the emperor's carriage, crushing it completely. By pure luck, Qin Shi Huang was riding in a different carriage that day. He survived. But something broke in him. Before the attack, he was a man focused on building his legacy. After the attack, he became a man obsessed with not losing it. For the first time, he was forced to confront a brutal truth: even the emperor of the entire known world could be killed. Even he was mortal. And that realization would turn into an obsession that ate him alive. He didn't just want to live a long life. He wanted immortality. He wanted to rule his empire forever.
And this is where the audit really begins, right? Because this isn't just a man being foolish. This is a man who has spent his entire life proving that he can bend the world to his will. He conquered 6 kingdoms. He rewrote the rules of civilization. Why wouldn't he believe he could conquer death too?
Exactly. And that's the core of the irrationality we're auditing here. For his entire life, every time Qin Shi Huang set a goal, he achieved it, no matter how impossible it seemed. So when the alchemists and mystics of his court came to him and told him they could give him eternal life, he didn't just believe them. He trusted them with his empire and his life. And that realization would turn into an obsession that ate him alive. He didn't just want to live a long life. He wanted immortality. He wanted to rule his empire forever. The alchemists told him of the legendary Penglai Islands, 3 sacred mountains floating in the East China Sea, home to immortal gods, who held the elixir of eternal life. It was a myth that had been around for centuries, but no emperor had ever poured the kind of resources into it that Qin Shi Huang did. He put a mystic named Su Fu in charge of a fleet of 60 ships, carrying 3,000 young men and women, with endless supplies of gold, grain, and treasure, to sail into the Pacific and find the immortal gods. Su Fu sailed away, and never came back. Legend says he found a new land, what we now know as Japan, and settled there with his fleet. But for Qin Shi Huang, this failure didn't break his belief. It only made him double down. He sent more expeditions, more fleets, more treasure, all chasing the same myth. A man who built his entire empire on strict laws, cold logic, and ruthless practicality, threw all of that away, chasing a promise of eternal life.
And that's the classic sunk cost fallacy, right? The more he invested in this search for immortality, the more he had to believe it was real. To admit that the elixir was a lie was to admit that he'd wasted his empire's wealth, his people's resources, and that he was still just a mortal, that he was still going to die.
That's exactly our audit finding here. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate choice to ignore reality, because the alternative, accepting his own mortality, was too terrifying for him to face. And the alchemists knew this. They knew exactly how to keep him compliant, how to keep the gold and the power flowing. So they gave him something tangible, something he could take every day, to feel like he was getting closer to immortality. They gave him pills. They called them immortality elixirs. They told him these pills would purify his body, extend his life, and eventually make him a god. But what they didn't tell him was what was in them. The core ingredient of these daily pills was cinnabar, a bright red mineral that's nearly 90% mercury sulfide. A deadly, neurotoxic poison. Every single day, the most powerful men in China drank poison, chasing eternal life, while slowly killing himself.
It's almost impossible to wrap your head around the irony here. The man who controlled everything, who conquered the world, was being poisoned every single day by the very thing he thought would save him. And we now know exactly what that poison did to him.
We do. Modern medicine has documented exactly what long-term mercury poisoning does to the human body. It starts with irritability, mood swings, uncontrollable paranoia. Then it progresses to delusions, memory loss, violent outbursts. Eventually, it causes complete organ failure and death. Every single one of these symptoms lines up perfectly with the final years of Qin Shi Huang's life. The once brilliant, calculating emperor became increasingly erratic. He became obsessed with secrecy, hiding himself away in a network of 27 palaces, linked by hidden tunnels. He refused to let anyone know where he was staying at any time, and executed anyone who revealed his location. He trusted no one, saw enemies everywhere, even in his closest advisors. He stopped holding court, stopped making public appearances. The poison wasn't just destroying his body. It was destroying his mind. And then, in 210 BC, it all came to an end. Qin Shi Huang was on another tour of his empire, when he collapsed suddenly. He died just a few days later, in a remote palace, in what is now Hebei province. He was just 49 years old. The man who chased immortality more than any other emperor in Chinese history died before he turned 50.
But the irony doesn't end there, does it? The emperor who controlled every single detail of his empire couldn't even control what happened to his own body after he died.
That's the most brutal part of this story. When Qin Shi Huang died, his closest advisors, Li Si, his prime minister, and Zhao Gao, his chief eunuch, panicked. They knew if the empire learned the emperor was dead, there would be rebellions, uprisings, the entire unified empire could collapse. So they did the unthinkable. They hid his death for 2 full weeks. They put his body in a closed imperial carriage and kept the convoy moving, as if nothing had happened. They had servants bring food to the carriage every day, they forged imperial edicts, they acted like the emperor was still alive and ruling. But it was the middle of summer. The body started to rot. The smell became unbearable. So to cover it up, they loaded a cart full of rotting salted fish, and had it drive right next to the emperor's carriage. They told everyone the smell was coming from the fish. The man who wanted to be remembered as an immortal god, the man who conquered the world, was reduced to a hidden, rotting corpse smuggled across his own empire, next to a pile of stinking seafood. That's the final irony of his obsession with immortality. He spent his entire life trying to avoid the humiliation of death, and in the end, his obsession made that humiliation infinitely worse.
And it gets even darker, because his obsession didn't just destroy him, it destroyed the empire he built. The advisors who hid his death forged a fake edict, ordering his oldest son and most trusted general to commit suicide. They put his youngest, most pliable son on the throne as a puppet emperor. Just 4 years after Qin Shi Huang died, his empire collapsed. The dynasty he wanted to last for 10,000 generations didn't even make it to 15 years.
But Qin Shi Huang's obsession with immortality didn't end with his death. Because even while he was alive, he was building himself an empire for the afterlife. A tomb so vast, so complex, so advanced, that it's still not fully excavated today. 2,200 years later. A tomb that holds the final secret of his toxic obsession. He started building his mausoleum when he was just 13 years old, the day he first took the throne. Over the 36 years of his reign, more than 700,000 workers labored to build it. It's a full underground replica of his imperial capital, Xianyang. It has palaces, towers, even an army of 8,000 life-size terracotta warriors, each with a unique face, built to protect him in the afterlife. We've all seen the Terracotta Army. But the real secret is in the heart of the tomb, the part we still can't reach. The Han Dynasty historian Sima Qian, writing just 100 years after Qin Shi Huang's death, described the tomb in his records of the Grand Historian. He wrote that the tomb was filled with rare treasures and deadly booby traps, crossbows set to fire on anyone who tried to break in. And then, he wrote this line: they used Mercury to make the 100 rivers, the Yangtze and Yellow River, and the Great Sea, set to flow mechanically. For centuries, historians thought this was a myth, an exaggeration. There was no way an ancient civilization could build a working underground river system of mercury. Until 1983, when modern archaeologists did soil tests on the mound above the tomb. What they found shocked the world. The soil above the tomb has mercury levels 100 times higher than the natural background level. The rivers of mercury are real.
Let that sink in. 2,200 years ago, he built an underground empire with a flowing river system made of the same poison that killed him, a toxic, uninhabitable tomb where he could rule as emperor for eternity, surrounded by the very thing that destroyed him in life.
That's the core of this entire audit. This is the full circle of his obsession. He wanted to escape death, so he built a palace of death. He wanted to be immortal, so he drank poison. He wanted to control everything, and in the end, his obsession controlled him. He conquered the entire known world, but he could never conquer his own fear.
And that's why this story still matters today. Because we all have that fear. We all have things we're terrified to lose. Our jobs, our health, our loved ones, our control over our lives. And we all make choices, big and small, driven by that fear. Choices that, just like Qin Shi Huang's, can end up destroying the very thing we're trying to hold on to. This isn't just a story about an ancient Chinese emperor. It's an audit of human nature, of what happens when we let fear drive our decisions.
So let's go back to the question we asked at the start. If you had Qin Shi Huang's absolute power, if you could control every single thing about the world around you, would you drink the elixir? Would you risk everything, even your own mind, your own empire, to chase immortality, to avoid death? Now it's your turn. We want to hear from you. Would you take the pill? Would you risk everything for a chance at eternal life? Or would you accept the limits of being human? Leave your answer in the comments below. If you love this deep audit of the hidden history behind one of the most famous emperors in the world, if you want more stories about the impossible choices that shaped civilizations, hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell.
This is Orient Obscura, and every single week, we unlock the obscure parts of the past that textbooks leave out. We don't just tell stories. We audit the past. Thank you for listening.
We'll see you next week.